What do Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, Need for Speed Underground, and Guitar Hero 3 have in common? On the surface, other than being video games, nothing really. But for me, they're the three games that I can point to that really shaped my musical listening habits for the future. One is pretty much just straightforward rock and metal music, obviously that being Guitar Hero. The other two are really an eclectic mix of hip-hop, punk rock, electronic music, and metal. All three were video games that I spent hours and hours playing. But even more than that, the music that coincided with that playing has really stuck with me the rest of my life. I can still remember dropping into the hangar in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 listening to Guerrilla Radio. I can still remember playing Before I Forget by Slipknot in Guitar Hero 3. I can remember Lil Jon as the load-up music for Need for Speed Underground as I'm making my car choice. While there are other games out there that are better technical video games, you get your Legends of Zelda, Dark Souls, which I've never played, stuff like that. I'm more so looking at this just through the lens of music. And I think without these three video games, I believe my music tastes would be vastly different than they are now. Or I guess I should say a little bit more that these are the three games that I am choosing. I could pick really any of the Tony Hawk games up until Tony Hawk's Underground 2 and say that's the best album. I just remember Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 the most, which is interesting because I only played it on Nintendo 64. I didn't have I believe it was PS1, maybe early PS2 version, or the Xbox version. It just goes to show how formative music can be at a young age, that I remember that one the most, even though I played it in 2001. But I think a lot of kids that grew up around my time can point to video games as a source of musical influence. I can imagine a lot of people would say Halo and Halo 2 for their musical scores are probably very influential on how they perceived music moving forward, how they took it in, maybe even if they became musicians themselves. Another soundtrack that I've really come to appreciate later in life is GoldenEye, and I've watched a lot of videos on both the creation of that soundtrack and just how it relates to the movie, but it feels like I was sort of just spoiled with that. For my case, I was never a musician, but I could understand the complexity of music that I was hearing, especially related to some of the songs in Guitar Hero 3, but allowing for diversity in music through video games really shaped how I can listen to music going forward. I would say overall, both areas that I grew up in were predominantly white, and most of the radio stations that you would find were either country music or pop. And I think part of the reason that I never gravitated towards those was because of these video games. Because I spent so many hours listening to punk or rock or metal music through Guitar Hero 3, Guitar Hero 2, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Tony Hawk's Underground, combined with the hip-hop and electronic music of Need for Speed Underground and Need for Speed Underground 2, it really impacted my life because it showed there was more that could be done within different genres that I was never being exposed to. It was especially apparent at the time when I was growing up. Country music was starting to divert away from the 90s country sound and storytelling towards the mid-2000s, late 2000s. Bro country sound that, while I did listen to a couple of songs, it was never something that really caught my attention. And as for the pop music, there's something about pop music that I've just never really gravitated toward. I've always leaned towards the abstract and alternative music. And I think probably a little bit of that when I was younger was probably elitism and snobbery. I mean, one of the main genres I was listening to in college was metal, and that is a very divisive area of music. There are a lot of people that believe their specific subgenre of metal is the only one you should be listening to, or you can't have a new sound and really be accepted in the genre. Take, for instance, my senior year of high school was 2011, 2012, and that was really the rise of electronic metalcore and really the Rise Records metalcore music that was popular for a couple years there. You're getting bands like Asking Alexandria, Memphis Mayfire, Of Mice and Men, stuff like that. Now that, relative to the thrash metal, speed metal, death metal, all that stuff was never accepting of Risecore, if you want to call it that. I guess all I wanted to do with this episode is really just highlight those 3 video games. I can distinctly remember in my childhood the amount of times playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater, whether it was 1, 2, 3, 4, Underground, Underground 2. Just the amount of fun I had listening to music and skateboarding. I was into skateboarding in real life, but I could never really ride. I think it was more so my brother that had more of the ability to actually skateboard than I did. So I was more into just the culture side of skateboarding. And of course that could make me a poser. That's fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. But the musical side of skateboarding is really where I found my comfort. As for Need for Speed Underground, again, I'm not a car guy. I know cars to an extent. I could point out most car types, makes, models, everything like that, but I'm not going to be able to get in depth into what kind of engine a car has. I just like the ability to race in a video game and listen to, whether it's who was it, P.D. Pablo or Lil Jon, or T.I. was in there, or I think even Rob Zombie was in there for a minute. It really just opened me to a different world of musical choice that I had not had the opportunity to explore. I think both of those really shaped me toward Guitar Hero. One, because it was a very influential video game for a time there, but 2, both of those soundtracks really drove me toward listening to alternative music. And Guitar Hero 2 and 3 specifically, were filled with alternative rock, classic rock, or metal, most of which I had never heard in my life. Obviously, you're getting into your Freebirds, your Through the Fire and Flames, then you're getting, Warrant, Cheap Trick, Kansas, Iron Maiden. I mean, I think I could go on and on. There are 2 specific songs in Guitar Hero. I believe it's Guitar Hero 3? But it might be Guitar Hero 2, the bonus songs, that really were probably the most influential on my musical taste as a young kid, because I really got into metalcore, and those would be 6 by All That Remains and The Light That Blinds by Shadows Fall. It took me a while with those songs to accept that, hey, I like this kind of music. But once I did, it was all I wanted to listen to. And again, you could take any picture of me and say that kid listens to top 40 hits. He's not listening to metalcore music or experimental hip-hop like De La Soul, Souls of Mischief, Blue Scholars, Atmosphere, stuff like that. But I like to think that it just makes me musically diverse. Yeah, I think this is just really I'm going to call it a short side mission just because it's relating to video games, but I think that's probably it for me. It was probably a bit rambly. Hopefully there is something in there for you guys to take away. At the end of the day, if you've never listened to any of the soundtracks for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater or Need for Speed Underground, Underground 2, or Guitar Hero 2 and 3, I would say give them a listen. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff on there. And if you do end up liking any of it, awesome. If not, that's cool. I think that's one of the most important things about music that I've learned, is that like the music you like. If you don't like the music, that's cool. You don't need to say anything. Or if you really feel impassioned to say something, just try and keep it nice. But yeah, that'll be it for me. Let me know down in the comments if you have any video games that were really influential on your music listening. Otherwise, have a great weekend.